The alien palace stood high above the burning clouds of a foreign world, a place where humans were not welcome. In the marble halls of the great throne room, the alien princess walked slowly, her long robes sweeping behind her like rivers of fire. She carried herself with pride, but her eyes burned with something darker. She hated humans. Her hatred was not quiet, not hidden. It was sharp, clear, and it lived in every word she spoke. To her, humans were the plague of the galaxy, creatures of destruction who knew nothing but war. She had grown up listening to the elders tell stories about human males. They called them beasts dressed in armor, predators who destroyed without mercy. The princess believed every word, and she carried that belief like a weapon. That day the court was filled with whispers. Something rare had happened, something almost forbidden. A human soldier had been captured on the battlefield, taken alive and brought to the Empire. Soldiers had killed hundreds of his kind before, but this one survived. He was now standing in chains, brought before the throne for judgment. His body was covered in heavy battle armor, strange black metal plates marked with scars of war. His helmet hid his face, leaving only a dark reflection where eyes should have been. To the princess, it was proof of what he was. A monster, a danger, nothing more. The alien king sat above, old and cautious, his eyes fixed on the silent prisoner. The court murmured about what should be done. Some wanted to execute the human immediately, to send a warning back to his kind. Others wanted to study him, to learn what secrets humans hid under their strange armor. The princess stood taller than them all, her voice rising above the noise. She declared that humans were not to be trusted, that no male of their kind should ever be allowed to live in the Empire. Her words struck the court like fire. Some nodded, some trembled, but all listened. The human, however, did not speak. He stood chained, still, silent. The helmet covered his expression, and the lack of sound unsettled many. He did not struggle, he did not resist. He simply stood there as if he had chosen to be caught. The princess hated that silence. To her, it was arrogance. She stepped closer, her sharp voice cutting through the air. She told him that his kind had no honor, that humans were violent and unclean, that his death would be a gift to the galaxy. Still, the human did not move. Still, he did not speak. Her hatred only grew. She wanted to see fear in him, but there was none. She wanted to see rage, but there was only silence. He was chained like a prisoner, but he carried himself like someone who was not broken. The princess felt her anger twist into something she did not like, something she could not name. His silence felt like defiance, and that defiance unsettled her more than screams ever could. The alien court grew restless. The guards shifted their weapons. The king looked down with heavy eyes. The air was thick with tension, as though the very walls of the palace could feel the weight of what stood before them. The princess could not look away from the dark helmet. Behind it she imagined a cruel face, the face of a beast who had killed many of her people. Yet the longer she stared, the more she felt a strange question growing inside her. What did he look like? Why did he not speak? Why did he not act like the monster she had always believed humans were? She forced those thoughts away and raised her chin higher. She shouted to the court that this was proof of human arrogance, that the helmet itself was a mockery, hiding the truth of what they really were. The alien nobles clapped and agreed with her, eager to side with their princess. But even as they cheered, her eyes stayed locked on the motionless figure in chains. The human finally moved, not with words, not with violence, but with the smallest tilt of his head. It was enough to silence the entire room. The sound of chains shifted lightly like a whisper of metal. The gesture was simple, but it carried a strange weight, as though he had heard everything and judged them in silence. The princess felt her heart quicken, though she could not explain why. It was not fear alone, it was something else, something unwelcome. That night the human was dragged back to the prison chambers deep below the palace, still silent, still wearing his helmet. But in the great throne room the whispers did not die. The courtiers spoke in secret about his calmness, about his strange control. The nobles who once cheered now began to ask quiet questions. Was he dangerous because of his strength or because of something else hidden inside him? The princess could not sleep. She walked to her balcony, staring at the burning skies of her world. In her mind she saw again the stillness of the human. She hated him, hated his silence, hated his calm. But deep inside, beneath the layers of hatred, another thought clawed its way forward. What was he hiding under that helmet? The hatred of her people told her never to ask, never to wonder, never to think. But the question refused to leave her mind. The prisoner was human, male, dangerous. She told herself this over and over again. Yet the image of the chained soldier standing tall and silent in the throne room would not fade. It was a crack in her certainty, a shadow she could not chase away, and though she tried to bury it, she knew this was only the beginning. The next day, the palace filled again with the sound of voices. The court had gathered for the questioning of the human. Guards lined the walls, their weapons humming with energy. The nobles whispered to one another as if every word might disturb the silent figure in chains. The human was brought forward, his armor still scarred, his helmet still in place. He walked with slow steps, his chains heavy but his posture steady. The princess sat higher than the rest, her eyes burning with the same hatred she had carried yesterday. She wanted to crush him with her words. She wanted the entire court to see what she saw when she looked at him. When the king raised his hand, silence fell. The old ruler asked the human to speak, to explain his presence in their war, to answer for the lives lost. But there was no answer. The helmet stared forward, unblinking, unmoved. The silence spread like a storm, heavy and strange. Some nobles shifted in their seats, uneasy with the way he ignored the demand. The princess smiled coldly, for she thought his silence was weakness. She rose to her feet and stepped forward. Her voice rang clear in the hall as she accused him of arrogance. She called him a beast who hid behind metal because his face was too shameful to show. The nobles cheered her words, eager to support their princess, but still the human did not react. That calm silence was not weakness. It was something else, something no one could name. His stillness made every word feel smaller, every insult lighter. The princess felt her anger twist inside her chest as though she were striking at empty air. She expected rage, she expected resistance, but the human gave nothing. And in that nothing, there was a strange kind of strength. She stepped closer until she could see her reflection in his dark helmet. Her heart beat faster, though she refused to let it show. She told him that humans had no honor, no loyalty, no soul. She told him that his kind were destroyers of worlds. She wanted to see him break, to see his silence shatter, but his stillness remained. The chains clinked softly as he adjusted his stance, and the sound echoed across the hall like thunder. Even that simple sound carried more weight than her sharpest words. The alien prince, who was to be her husband, rose and spoke with arrogance. He told the court that humans were cowards, that this one would kneel before the empire, and that he would make an example of him. The princess nodded, but her eyes stayed fixed on the human. She wanted to believe her betrothed, but inside something resisted. The prince's words were loud, but the human silence felt louder. The questioning continued, but no answer came. Priests tried to chant threats. Soldiers rattled their weapons, yet the human stood like stone. Some in the court began to murmur about his restraint, whispering that no alien would stand so calm in the face of certain death. The king's face grew darker with each moment of silence. For the first time, the empire did not look down upon a prisoner. They looked at him as if he were something they did not understand. The princess felt heat rise inside her chest. She wanted to destroy that feeling. She demanded that the helmet be removed, but the guards hesitated. They feared that breaking the human's armor would provoke him into violence. She demanded again, her voice sharp as a blade, but the king raised his hand to silence her. He said the human would reveal himself in time. The words felt like a wound. She hated that she had to wait. She hated that the mystery remained hidden. When the session ended, the human was taken away again. He turned only once, and in that moment the princess swore his helmet faced directly at her. No words, no sound, just the silent reflection of her own eyes staring back at her. That image burned inside her mind long after the doors closed. Later, when the nobles dined in the golden halls, the princess sat among them with an untouched plate. They laughed and spoke of power, of control, of war. Yet every time her mind drifted, she saw the still figure in chains. She felt her hatred, but alongside it something heavier, a strange pull, an unease she could not fight. She told herself it was nothing. She told herself it was anger. But in her heart she knew it was not the same as before. That night she dreamed. In her dream, she walked the palace halls alone, and the sound of chains followed her. When she turned, the human stood there, helmet gleaming, silent as ever. She tried to speak, but her voice failed her. She tried to look away, but her eyes would not move. The dream ended with her reaching for his helmet, and she woke with her hands trembling. The first clash had not been of swords or fire. It had been of silence against words, calm against fury, stillness against storms. And in that clash, the princess felt something she could not control. For the first time in her life, her hatred no longer felt strong enough. It no longer felt pure, and that frightened her more than the human ever could. The palace was alive with anticipation. Rumors had spread across the empire that the human would finally be unmasked. Servants whispered in the corridors. Guards tightened their grips on their weapons, and nobles filled the grand chamber with restless excitement. They wanted to see what lay beneath the black armor. They wanted proof that the human was as monstrous as the stories claimed. The princess sat upon her seat, her heart heavy but her face cold, her eyes sharp as knives. She told herself that the truth would destroy the strange unrest inside her. She told herself that when the helmet was removed, everyone would see the beast for what he truly was. The heavy doors opened. The human soldier entered once again, chains dragging across the floor. His steps were measured, not stumbling, not broken. Even in captivity, he carried himself as if the weight of the galaxy rested on his shoulders alone. The silence that followed him was deafening, and every eye in the room followed his every move. The princess felt her breath quicken but forced herself to remain still. Her hatred had carried her this far, and she refused to allow it to falter now. The king raised his hand. He commanded that the helmet be removed. The guards hesitated. Fear lingered in their eyes as though unsealing the helmet would unleash something they could not control. One soldier stepped forward, trembling slightly as he reached for the dark visor. The princess leaned forward, unable to resist, her entire body tense. The noble court held its breath. With a hiss of metal, the locks released. The helmet came free, and for the first time, the human's face was revealed. The hall froze. The princess's eyes widened. She expected horror. She expected the twisted features of a monster, but what she saw unsettled her more deeply than any nightmare. The face was calm, striking, weathered by war, yet marked with quiet strength. His eyes were steady, clear, and they looked upon the court with a gaze that was neither pleading nor afraid. He looked at them as equals, as if the chains meant nothing. The princess felt her chest tighten. She could not move. She hated what she saw, not because it was monstrous, but because it was not. The human was not a beast. He was not ugly. He was not broken. He was everything her people had sworn humans could never be. For the first time, she saw doubt spread across the nobles' faces. Their whispers grew louder. If this was the enemy, then the enemy was not what they had believed. The prince spoke sharply, his voice shaking with unease. He declared that appearances meant nothing, that the human was still a danger. But his words fell flat. The human turned his eyes upon the prince, and in that single glance the room grew still again. No anger, no hate, only the steady weight of a man who had seen more than any of them could imagine. The princess looked at him, and her anger cracked. Her hatred, sharp as a blade for so long, bent under the quiet strength in his eyes. The king asked him to speak. For the first time since his capture, the human parted his lips. His voice was deep, calm, and steady. He spoke not with fury, but with certainty. He said he had not come to beg for his life. He said he would not bow. He said that chains could hold his body, but not his will. His words echoed through the chamber, heavy and undeniable. The court shifted uneasily. Some nobles lowered their eyes. Others stared in silence, unable to answer. The princess gripped the edge of her throne. Her nails dug into the cold stone as she tried to cling to the hatred she had always carried. Yet her heart betrayed her. The calm power in his voice stirred something inside her that she could not destroy. She wanted to call him a liar, to call him a beast, but her throat refused the words. She could only sit in silence as he had once been, as the weight of his presence pressed upon her. The prince stepped forward in anger, shouting that the human should be executed at once. His face burned with humiliation, his pride shaken by the prisoner's composure. But before he could finish, the princess raised her hand. The hall turned to her. Her voice was steady when she said the human should live. The words surprised even her. The court erupted in chaos. The nobles gasped. The prince shouted. The king frowned in deep thought. But the human only stood there, calm, watching her with eyes that seemed to see through every layer of her soul. That night, when the palace grew quiet and the stars burned cold above, the princess sat alone in her chamber. She could still see his face. She could still hear his voice. Every story she had ever been told about humans shattered in that single moment when the helmet fell away. The hatred she had carried felt weaker now, like smoke fading into the wind. And though she tried to deny it, though she whispered to herself that he was still the enemy, She knew that something had changed. For the first time in her life, the princess feared not the human strength but the truth he carried within him. And deep inside, beneath the fire of her hatred, a spark of something else began to burn. The days that followed were heavy with whispers. The palace no longer spoke of the human as a monster in chains, but as something different, something that disturbed their certainty. Servants avoided saying his name, yet carried his image in their eyes. Nobles who once laughed at human weakness now sat in silence when his presence was mentioned. The princess felt the weight of this change more than anyone. She sat through endless council meetings, but her mind wandered back to the face she had seen. It had not been the face of a beast. It had been calm, steady, and far too human. At night she dreamed of his eyes. They were not like the eyes of her people. They carried storms, battles, and memories that stretched far beyond the borders of her empire. Each morning she woke with her heart unsettled, her mind caught between hatred and something she did not dare to name. She told herself it was only curiosity, but the word felt weak. Curiosity did not make her breath catch when she remembered his gaze. The prince grew restless. His pride had been wounded in the throne room, and he wanted to erase that humiliation with blood. He pressed the king daily for execution, saying the human was a danger that should not live another sunrise. Yet the king hesitated. Perhaps it was age, or perhaps it was wisdom, but he saw value in understanding an enemy before destroying them. The princess sat silent in these arguments, though inside she burned. She did not want to agree with her betrothed, but she could not defend the human either. To speak in his favor would be betrayal. To call for his death would be a lie to herself. The human remained in his cell. Guards watched him day and night, but even in chains he unsettled them. He never begged for food or water. He never cursed. He sat in silence, his calm presence heavier than iron bars. Some guards whispered that he prayed to stars beyond their world. Others swore they felt him watching their souls through the dark. The princess heard these tales and found herself listening more closely than she should. One evening, unable to stop herself, she descended to the lower chambers where the prisoner was kept. The guards bowed, uncertain why their princess had come. She dismissed them with a cold command and walked into the cell alone. The air was damp, the stone walls heavy with shadows, and there he was, seated against the wall, his eyes opening slowly as she entered. For a moment she froze. Her heart betrayed her, skipping in her chest, but she forced her voice to remain sharp. She demanded answers. She demanded to know why he had stood silent before the court. She demanded to know why he looked at her as if he saw more than she wanted him to see. The human did not rise, nor did he shrink. His voice came steady, deep, carrying no fear. He told her that silence was sometimes louder than words, that to speak too soon would have been wasted breath. He told her that her people judged without knowing, and he refused to give them the pleasure of his desperation. The princess hated the way his words struck her, hated the way they made her think. She told him that humans were destroyers, that she would never believe otherwise. He only watched her, eyes calm, until her words felt weaker than they had ever felt before. She left quickly, her steps sharp but her chest heavy with confusion. That night she could not sleep. His words replayed in her mind, cutting through the walls she had built for so many years. The court grew uneasy as days passed. Nobles argued in private, some saying the human should die, others saying there was something to learn from him. The prince's anger turned into jealousy, for he saw the way his betrothed no longer looked at him the same way. Her eyes, once sharp and steady, now wandered to the thought of another face. He sensed the shift, though he did not speak of it. The princess struggled to hide her turmoil. In public she carried herself as proud as ever, but in private her mind betrayed her. Every glance at the stars reminded her of him. Every silence in the hall reminded her of his calm. She began to notice cracks in her own beliefs. If the human was truly a beast, why did his eyes hold more honor than the nobles of her court? If he was truly a monster, why did his words feel truer than the speeches of her prince? One evening she returned to his cell again. This time she did not shout. This time her voice was quieter, almost uncertain. She asked him about his people, about his wars, about the world that shaped him. He answered with honesty, telling her of fire and loss, of resilience and strength. His voice painted pictures that unsettled her, for they did not sound like the words of a creature without soul. They sounded like truth. When she left, she carried a weight she could not shake. The hatred she had once worn like armor now felt thinner, weaker. cracking with every memory of his voice. She told herself she still despised him, but the word despise no longer burned as it once had. In the quiet of her chamber, she admitted to herself what she feared most. She was no longer certain. Her hatred had been her shield, her certainty her crown, but both were breaking. In their place rose something far more dangerous. Curiosity had become fascination. Fascination had become unrest. And unrest was turning into something she could not control. And though she tried to bury it deep, the truth haunted her like a shadow. The human was no longer just her enemy. He was becoming something else entirely. The court prepared for a final decision. The nobles had grown restless, their patience breaking under the weight of uncertainty. Some demanded the human's execution, their voices filled with fear. Others whispered that he should be kept alive, a subject to be studied, a tool for the empire. The king sat in silence, his eyes distant, as if he could sense that this decision would shape more than the fate of one prisoner. The princess stood beside him, her heart in conflict, her face carved in cold stillness. She could not reveal the storm that raged inside her. When the human was brought again into the throne room, the atmosphere shifted. The chains clinked across the floor, yet he moved with the same steady calm as before. His face, no longer hidden, carried the same quiet strength that had unsettled them all. The princess forced herself to look at him without faltering, though her pulse betrayed her. She wanted to believe that his presence meant nothing, that he was still the enemy she had always known. But every time their eyes met, her certainty fractured further. The king asked him again why he had come, why humans fought with such reckless force, why they dared to challenge an empire older than their own son. The human's answer was simple, but it carried the weight of stone. He said that his people fought because survival was all they had. He said they carried their scars not as shame, but as proof that they endured when others would have fallen. His words struck deep. They were not the empty cries of a beast, but the truths of someone who had lived through fire. The prince sneered. He called the human a liar, a manipulator, a creature twisting words to win pity. He stepped forward, declaring to all that the princess would stand with him in condemning the prisoner. The court turned to her, their eyes expectant, waiting for her voice. For a moment she could not breathe. Her mind screamed to speak, to repeat the words she had carried all her life, to crush the storm building inside her. But when she opened her mouth, the words refused to come. She looked at the human, at the calm in his eyes, and in that silence she betrayed herself. She did not condemn him. The court erupted. Nobles argued, voices clashing like weapons. The prince's fury boiled, his pride wounded a second time. The king silenced them with a gesture, his expression unreadable. He declared that the human's life would not end yet, that further judgment would wait. Rage flickered through the court, but no one dared to oppose the king directly. The human bowed his head slightly, not in submission but in acknowledgement. The princess's breath caught in her throat. Later that night she found herself unable to rest. Her chambers felt like a prison, her walls heavy with secrets. At last she gave in to the pull that had haunted her since the day his helmet was removed. She returned to the cells, dismissing the guards once more. When she entered, he was standing, his chains glinting in the dim light. He turned toward her, his gaze steady, and the silence between them felt heavier than any words. She asked him what gave him such strength, what made him stand so calm in the face of death. His answer was quiet, but it echoed in her heart. He said strength came not from hatred, but from carrying the weight of others, from standing even when the world wanted him broken. His words unsettled her, for they were the opposite of everything she had been taught. Her people had told her that humans were ruled by rage, but in his voice she found no rage. She found something far more dangerous. She found truth. For the first time, she admitted aloud what she had never dared to say. She told him she had hated his kind since childhood, that her very blood demanded it, but now she was no longer sure what to believe. The words felt like fire leaving her throat. She hated herself for saying them, yet she could not stop. The human did not smile, did not mock her. He only said that truth often destroyed before it rebuilt, and that hatred was the easiest crown to wear, but the heaviest to remove. She left his cell trembling. The walls of her certainty were falling, stone by stone. She could no longer look at her people with the same confidence, no longer look at her prince without seeing his arrogance as hollow. The human had torn something open inside her that she could not close again. The next day, the prince confronted her in the gardens. His words were sharp, accusing. He demanded to know why she had stayed silent in court, why she had refused to condemn the prisoner. His jealousy burned, his pride demanded obedience. The princess answered with coldness, saying only that she spoke when she chose. But inside she felt a distance grow between them. His arrogance now looked small compared to the weight of the human silence. The palace seemed to grow darker as days passed. The nobles whispered of betrayal, of weakness in their rulers. The prince plotted, the king waited, the court divided, and in the center of it all stood the human, unbroken calm, his presence pulling at the heart of their empire. The princess could feel the pull more than anyone, and though she tried to resist, her heart was no longer her own. She had hated him, she had feared him, she had condemned him. But now, standing on the edge of everything she had believed, she realized the truth she had buried beneath all her anger. The human was no monster. He was no beast. He was the turning point of her life, the fracture in the foundation of her world. And though she could not yet admit it, not to her people, not even to herself, she was already lost to the change he had begun.